And hello, everybody. Welcome to this last stream block that we will have on Star West 2022. As you can see here, I have lots of amigos, performance friends that are going to be today collaborating in this performance testing panel. People, no particular order, you're on my left. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience here in the feed and then pass the speech to the next panelist?
Sure. My name is Francisco. I work at Insperity in Houston, Texas. I'm a 3-year performance engineer.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Jakubiak. I work at Parasoft. We make functional and performance testing tools. So, yeah.
Eran Kinswoner, I'm a chief evangelist for Perfecto and Blazemeter. Blazemeter is a performance testing solution and API testing solution as well. Happy to be here.
I'm Jonathan Wright. I've been doing performance about 20 years now. So Wilson Marr got me started. I had the pleasure of being part of the Performance Advisory Council. So, I'm really excited today to talk about SRE and also performance engineering.
It's such a pleasure to have you all here and to be playing with this mic that goes off and on. It's such a mess. So, lots of performance knowledge for the people watching on the stream. We're going to be touching some pointy topics in performance, sharing different perspectives, because I'm super happy that I have people from different areas or ways of doing performance. We're going to share, also give the opportunity if the audience here has any questions that we can respond. And the best part of this is going to be that most probably many of us will have different responses to some of those questions. It's going to get really interesting, big grand slam and combination of combos. So to start this, I would like to give each one of the panelists the opportunity to share their perspective on what is the most important thing according to each one of you. In order, again, I'm just going to go on this order, no particular reason. What do you think is most important in performance testing for organizations nowadays? First, Francisco.
Right on the spot. So being that I've been doing this for 3 years, right now our company basically hasn't hit that maturity level of standardizing what it is that we need to achieve in terms of performance. So for us right now, it's more of not just running performance for the sake of running, but trying to get a baseline as to where we are in terms of what our response times are. And I think once we start establishing that, then the idea is to take it to the next level where we start comparing and we start seeing in the future how we can improve our current systems from where we are right now.
Very good. Next.
Yeah, for me, we make testing tools, but we also have to do our own testing. What we found in our own development organization that's really helpful is to make performance testing repeatable. So turning it in from just a test or a test that you run and then you manually analyze. Obviously, you still have those aspects, but turning that into something that could effectively be a regression test for performance has been really important for us. So we have defined scenarios that we run repeatedly nightly, and we can graph the results of those over time with metrics that can pass or fail the test. And we can look at that, and if a metric fails, we know, we've got a performance problem. But also, in performance, things fluctuate. So you often have your metrics are not as, they're not maybe as tight as you want. So then you graph it over time so you can see as things creep up, maybe your metrics didn't fail, but you can watch the performance over time. So those kinds of things have really helped us, monitor and keep the performance good as we keep developing our applications. So I think that's one thing that's maybe not as common in performance testing, but implementing something like that is very useful.
Certainly important. Miguran?
Just building on top of these great comments, I would actually take a different approach because you told us that we need to give different perspectives. So I'm just following you. And if James Bach is by any chance watching, I know that he hates the word shift left. So I won't use shift left, James. I would just talk about, and I think in your session, Leandro, you talked about testing early, okay? And we all talk about, continuous testing, DevOps, ensuring high user experience. So doing this all performance engineering, performance testing earlier in the cycle, obviously is something really important. Second, I think we are now living in a slightly new world, okay? If you just look at some of the recent stats, a third of all global commerce today is done online, okay, due to the pandemic, the fun stuff that we had over the past 2 years, which means that the cost of failure around performance is even higher because, again, every third person today is buying things online, whether it's on mobile or on web. So it needs to simply work and function and perform. So shifting it left, just doing it early is really important. And again, the cost of failure of not doing it is just increasing.
Yeah, when you mentioned that type of shift and that we are changing and evolving, and given that we are in Disney, I right there and then started to think a whole new world. Amigo Jonathan?
Absolutely. And so I'll go against everything that Eran's just said, just to keep things going. So obviously I focus on shift right over shift left. There's still value in shift left. Don't worry.
I was expecting that.
It's okay. But, part of it is around hyper baselining, right? So I think the early component point there was, how do I understand my current state? So I'm going to talk a little bit based on the actual topic of this area, site reliability testing, right? We can take a hyper baseline of the current state of our systems, whether that be in a pre-prod environment or a production environment. And I think that's where things like open telemetry really come in. This is where, being able to capture really valuable data within your APM to understand where you are today. And we can talk about things like chaos testing, chaos engineering, around dealing with systemic failure in the real world, testing as if it was the real world. But actually, if we talk about shift right for a second, and coming back to your shift left comment, is even defining non-functional requirements, right? You find within organizations, from an effective performance engineering perspective, they're not even starting with the basics. So they have no idea of what good looks like. So we literally just did a live stream, and I said, okay, I'm going to go into Target and I'm going to see how long Target's website takes to load after we've done a speed test to see what the connectivity likes. Does anyone ever want to guess at what Target.com came back with before it was loaded up?
I don't know.
Well,
45
seconds.
How much?
45 seconds.
Oh, God.
No.
Not that bad.
Not bad. 12 seconds before the page was actually done complete. So that's just not acceptable in these days, right? We're on a Wi-Fi connection. We tested it 100 meg, and we couldn't get the page down in 12 seconds.
Right.
People move away, right?
Yeah.
This is a new generation, Gen Alpha, who they need instant gratification. It needs to be there and available and buy. If not, they're just going to go somewhere else. And I think this is the importance now, is that brand is at the front of everything. Like Disney, you go live with Disney Plus and it goes down in the first week. That's not a great start, right? That is kind of, wasn't you expecting that amount of demand? So I think this kind of moves hopefully onto another question.
Yeah, it's very, really critical. And I don't know who of all the opinions or which ones to stand with. All of them are important. I agree and slightly disagree with all of them. And it's that's the point for us. But as well, I want to get some interaction from the audience. Any of you has a different perspective or want to state what you personally may be passionate or think performance testing should be different? Anyone would like to say what is very important for you in performance testing? Scalability? Yeah. Let's take on that. What do you think of scalability, Francisco?
That it's very important. I think having that scalability on a website or just as an organization, it just prepares you for those days when it's going to be busy and you expect high volume, high traffic coming in. You need to have a reliable, upstanding site in order to be able to, maintain those users, just that retention.
What's your thought on focusing on scalability?
I agree.
Very straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, it seems obvious to me, so I guess I don't have a lot to add.
I agree, +1. I would just say that, with Blazemeter, we see customers that scale to almost 1 million or even 2 million of concurrent users that they're testing against just to prepare for kind of stormy weather also. But I would just add to the scalability also the coverage, which means on which platforms are you doing this performance testing and in which locations. Okay, there are many different websites that obviously are being operated and used by many users in different, geographies, different network, conditions, mobile, 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, and so on. So I'll just build on top of the scalability, which is in my mind critical, but add all these different pillars, which kind of complements this performance testing strategy.
Jonathan?
Yeah, so I'm surprised.
You need to agree with me.
I completely agree with. I completely agree with Aaron.
Thank God.
That you can get that. That's one snippet
Just
that you
one.
can keep on reusing over and over. But you didn't say Black Friday. I generally was hoping you were going to jump in Black Friday because literally every year something exciting happens in Black Friday, right? And when I joined the Performance Advisory Council, I got to spend some time with Stuart Moncrief, who runs myloadtest.com. And he'd written this really smart algorithm to go and check, baseline all the retailers, so about 10,000 retailers. And then we used BuiltWith and a few other things to go and understand what stacks and technology they were using on their sites and try and see how things change between Black Friday and regular traffic to give us a bit of a point in the area. And it was quite revealing because certain companies that have gone out of business since, we could actually see that they were failing at their kind of from a scalability perspective. And you had a really good point. And I think when we look at performance, sometimes we are fascinated by scale, right? So I know when I was at Blazemeter with you guys, part of it we were testing the Model 3 launch, right? We were expecting, or Elon was expecting, millions of pre-orders to happen, right? So spun up, and in the cloud, Taurus went up. Different geolocations on different multi-cloud injectors in different geos with different network virtualization profiles, injecting a huge amount of traffic into the website. What happens? Well, it fails, right? It's kind of, we know that's going to happen. However, we do get excited about 1 million plus kind of load injectors. But I think there's a level of realism, right, to how we actually do this. And we talk about, within things like APMs, we talk about things like real user monitoring, real user testing, that we should always have synthetic or real users testing our system and see if there's degradation over time. Just like you mentioning, you've got your continuous performance kind of testing. So my point would be, is like I sat talking to a streaming service company quite recently who may or may not have done a prequel to a very famous, TV series. Now, they launched and the HBO Max went down, right? So this other streaming companies turned around to us and said, we want 500 Apple TVs, and we want you to be able to put them into the labs, host it for us, and then look at the tearing or the video quality of the stream to give us that real device testing to show us, okay, what does it actually look like from the eyes of the end user, combined with emulation. And I think that's what we've got to get the balance for, is real mobile devices at scale, combine it with things like lifecycle virtualization, so service virtualization, network function virtualization, and bring that balance in to make it as realistic as possible, not just large scale, injection.
Well, you're touching on one thing that's kind of interesting, right? Which is how much of it is simulated users versus real, right? Yep. So you've got the real devices. You have to have that because that's where you can validate the actual functionality on the real thing. But scaling that is hard, right? So then you want to scale with more of the virtual users, right, to get the load, but you still have to be able to validate at the real user level, right?
It's pretty funny because, except for you, Jonathan, you hit the point I was going to play devil's advocate and say, like, no, I'm against all of you, which most of you, it was interesting to me that most of you were like, yes, capacity, pushing it to the extreme. But my personal opinion and why I'm gonna be bringing some chaos, no pun intended, is that the most important performance metric or performance effort is for one user. For the departure point, and Jonathan mentioned it, something like that. Like you already know that before starting the test that something is not well there. Just one thing can be slowing down the system, and that makes the capacity test or pushing it further kind of pointless.
Okay.
And I would like to hear from each one of you if you have had that experience and how it has been that you have found something that clearly doesn't perform without needing to do much. Francisco, have you had that?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. But I can give an example where I was asked to test basically how the server would respond to just making requests. And one thing that we didn't take into consideration was the pacing of just sending the request. Without putting any pacing, we noticed that within like 5 to 10 seconds, the system just crashed. We at the time we didn't know why it was crashing. But it wasn't until we went back and we started looking at what it is that we were really trying to measure that we found out if we started adding pacing to it, then that's when we noticed that, hey, the system sort of stabilized over time as more users were added. But without the pacing, then we noticed that the system would just
You were
completely
hitting it too hard.
too hard, correct. And so it's just having an understanding of that. Like that's the one thing I can tell you that I've run into, where just we need to pay attention into those small little details like that.
That's a good example of just pretty much going straight ahead into too hard without doing gradual stops or
Right.
analyzing. What do you think? Any experiences in those
Well,
situations?
I think you're highlighting there's the scalability testing, but then there's sort of the baseline. I guess it's more of a baseline performance, right? That doesn't involve scale. And I think we found with some of our clients, like the importance of, like, as part of your functional tests, if you can capture the sort of the baseline performance of that test, and then you can measure that over time, right? Even if it's only one user, if it starts degrading, then you can see, okay, it's degrading, right? And so that's one way of doing performance testing, but you're not actually scaling anything.
Again, I always like to repeat, performance testing is not load testing, and it's not everything. Load testing is not everything in performance. Eran?
So actually, I have some nice example because if you can see on my shot, I have two logos, right? One is Blazemeter and the other one is Perfecto. And when my company acquired Blazemeter last year, we thought, okay, what can unite both? Perfecto is a functional testing for web and mobile, and Blazemeter is known for performance testing. So how these two kind of relate? And we came up with a nice story and actually a working solution, which is based exactly on what you're mentioning, Leandro, and you guys as well. Call it single user performance or baselining, that doesn't matter. You take a mobile application, you record a script on Appium on a single mobile device, for example, a banking application, and you just search for an ATM and you want to get the baseline, how much it takes to find an ATM with a single mobile device. But then once it works and you get the HAR file and you generate everything, you then go to the Blazemeter portal and you scale it to, I don't know, 10,000 users or whatever, and put load on the back end and see if it's still the same user experience. So kind of a mobile user experience testing, starting with a functional script, extending to a performance script. And I thought it was a nice story, and we actually got some nice insights and degradation in performance as you scale and put some more load. So that's a nice.
I love the perspective because many I've seen are too focused on generating loads from multiple mobile devices, where first step, make that one device works, and then start to stress the backend and do a good mix. That's super important. Miguel, Jonathan?
Yeah, definitely. So I must admit, I had this large debate with Scott Moore on a couple of recent webcasts around performance for one, right? And I see the advantages of, like we just said, with the target website, right? If it's just one user, well, it's not, it's production. But if that's the experience from one, then you've got a problem, right? Okay. And I think starting with one and seeing how it goes is really important. I think that you highlighted a massive point there about kind of capturing the PCAP an understanding that there's more to it than just the user direct injection. And, if we look at something like a soak test over a number of hours, you'll find that even the newest architectures will still have issues with sustaining load over a large period of time. Is that realistic to the load patterns that you see in production? Well, that's why, again, you've got to go back to your APM. Volumetrics is incredibly important to understand, well, what does it look like? But then also, what does 20% increase look like? What was it increased over compared to last year, right? But going back to that for a second, and people, I caught up with Todd DiCaprio the other day, and looking at Splunk. Splunk's just introduced a whole stack of real user monitoring. Now, I really like that. Again, it's synthetic, but it actually shows you the pages loading up as if they would do in a kind of a headless browser proxy. And I kind of said the same thing. I was like, well, you've got real devices in Perfecto, or AWS Labs or wherever it is. Why don't you take real devices and do real user testing and use that as information continuously? Because you find that it's also very happy path real user monitoring. This is a test which I'm just going to do a dummy payload through an API. And it's not a particularly large payload. We've tested it multiple times throughout the life cycle. It isn't that interesting. It's not actually causing any real kind of interesting SQL kind of at the bottom end. And you've got things like Dynatrace and PurePath, where you've got this information of, well, what are those transactions that are actually causing a lot of back end activity? And then you've got, over time, things like memory leak, and you kind of need to understand all of the components. I walked past the HCL booth today, and my favorite performance tool used to be Green Hat, because it would be great because you had a combination of service virtualization, architecture.
But I'm going to stop you there because you're just about to go to my next question. Yeah, I mean, first, before we get into that question, anyone here has experience in the audience a process visibly non-performant that we're trying to load test wrongfully? No one? No? When you start automating and creating your tests, everything is fast and worthy of being tested for volume? No, right? I see many faces, sad faces. Yeah, man, was a bad experience, right? Yeah, it is something really common. And sadly, in my perspective, we jump too fast into try load, when our friend James Pulley generally said, like, you cover and guarantee good performance for one user, and you have probably 80% of the trail already covered. But what I stopped you, amigo Jonathan, the next question is going to be tricky. I'm going to put some people on the spot. Thinking of performance, not only load testing, performance in general, performance assurance. What are the two best tools or most used? What do you use the most right now to guarantee performance testing tool-wise? Again, not only load. Francisco?
Specifically tools-wise, like, I guess right now, even within my company, we use Neoload. That one helps us just be able to track all types of metrics that we want, whether it's just, like you said, like either loading or reporting. It has an overall suite that we can use. That's the only one I can think of right now.
That's the strongest one. You covered one. Good.
Yeah, so for us, I mean, since we sell testing tools, we use our own tools, as we should. So we have our own load testing tool that will take our functional, like our API scenarios that we can build in our functional tool, and then we can run those under load. And I think Jonathan was starting to allude to this, or he mentioned it, not only do you need to load your services in your application, but often to support that, you have these back-end services that you might not have full access to, or might cost you money or whatever, right? You need to be able to control how they behave, because that's not the main thing you're testing. The main thing you're testing is a particular service or particular app. So we also, have our service virtualization product that will allow us to mock those back-end services, inject delays as needed to make them behave the way the real one would, And then you could actually focus testing on the main app or service that you're going to test.
So those two, what are the names? Do they have?
The Parasoft load test and Parasoft virtualize.
Okay. Amigo Ran?
So again, same as you. I wouldn't say that the performance testing tool that we have are dog food, but we believe that we should eat our own dog food, which means we use for performance testing JMeter and BlazeMeter to test our own tools. I can tell you that even with Perfecto, not related to performance testing, we test our solutions with Appium and with Cypress and with Selenium, because this is what our customers are using. So we are testing with the same tools that we are providing the world. So, but yeah, it's mostly BlazeMeter and JMeter, and we do have also the mocking services layer that helps us also when we're doing pre-production testing and stuff like that.
Great. You went a little bit above 2, but
that was a lot more than 2. That means
yeah,
I
you
can.
closed it
Oh, you
with
said
Blaze
2?
and J.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Pick 2. What are Amigo Ran? 2? Blaze and J?
Blaze.
Okay.
I'll just.
Jonathan?
I'm gonna have 10 now, just so you can do
No,
it.
no.
I'm only joking.
No,
But,
stay
to the
in
next
the
level.
but I love Taurus. You know, obviously, I know Alon's a good friend of mine. He was the co-creator of JMeter. You know, JMeter's become a kind of a de facto standard. You know, it's been a bit light on the analytics side of things, but you know, through help, Graphdana and a few other things, we're now actually getting to a point where we can really do that. So, hats off to the Taurus landscape for that.
Yep.
But I'm going to pick 2, and I've got another one which is not a tool, so it feels like it can pass, which is Google Lighthouse, right? You know, the fact that you can go off.
I count it as a tool.
It tells you a lot of information, but it tells you that vital information. If you remember the days of the Shunra days when Shunra kind of came in and give you this report around, you know, these are the things you should be changing, your CDNs, this is how you should be configuring Cloudflare, all that kind of basic information that you can do, like I said, to get it working with one. So, but I'm not going to use my 2 for that, because otherwise I'll be too upset. So I'm going to say
That's a trick. We already
You already put one in, but he's not using it.
I'm not
I
using
warned
it.
you.
So I'm going to go with Captain,
Okay, cool.
which is really important, you know, and if you're not using Captain now, you should go and download it. It will change your life, you know. So you mentioned the importance of being able to understand over time trends.
Right.
This allows you to pretty much set up a green light, red light, which is obviously our favorite Netflix series as well, to actually show you, as you're doing continuous performance, how things change over time, and allow you into your build and development tools. Completely free, open source. Thanks to the wonderful guys at Dynatrace for making that possible, which is, again, our great APM. But of course, if I'm going to use my one on Captain, the other one would, of course, have to be Facilita. Now, Facilita is a product that was 10 years ago, used to do a lot of Citrix load testing. I used to love, you know, this idea of doing things like secure desktop on demand testing, because I think we're now in a position where we're testing incredibly complex systems in large banks and financial systems, that things like Citrix is really important. So Facilita is now Eggplant Performance, which Scott Moore recently did a whole stack of stuff for us. So Facilita and Captain would be my 2 tools that I'd like to throw in there.
Great.
And they're both community versions as well, so you can just use them for free.
Open source.
Yeah, that's super important. I like that perspective of focusing a little bit on open source. Now, scouting a little bit from the audience, what is the tool that you use the most for performance? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna be one list of all these things that they're talking about. And, yeah, so we are doing a lot of things to homegrown stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
homebrews, that's also very important.
I think that we've done a good job of seeing what's out there. And, yeah, we can check out all the Parasoft stuff too. But, yeah, we're just learning.
Okay, yeah, homebrew, I like that attitude as well. Any other? JMeter?
Neophys and JMeter.
Okay.
Just in case it's-
Thank you.
K6, we
Over
forgot
there?
that.
We test out stuff with entirely homegrown tools.
Wow, this is very interesting that we are finding so many homebrew. If I may say, for some of the simulations, it's also easy to do. And I think nowadays that we have so many APIs and everything is service-based, even with a command line and some threads, you could be doing some stuff. So, those are good propositions. It surprises me and disturbs me here that no one, a little bit, Jonathan, you mentioned APMing or instrumentation or the networking tab on the developers tools. Those are like a treasure chest on performance metrics. Probably my question was, what do you use the most? But as well, do any of you have any suggestions or recommendations on those areas? Francisco?
I'll be honest, like with us right now, we're very heavily focused on using Neoload. At least on my end, like I do a lot of API testing, so I don't get that opportunity to work on the front end, like on the browser side of things. But I've been hearing a lot of good things about using the Chrome extension, the Lighthouse, where you can now do CLI for Lighthouse. Just download the npm package. So that's definitely something I will be looking into, for myself in the future.
That's great. I'm super happy that we are generating some gears turning. Have you used the backend monitoring for Neoload?
No, yet.
With APIs, it's difficult because sometimes you don't have control. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I have two thoughts, but it's interesting. I think like backend monitoring depends. Are you testing at the service level, which is what you're talking about, right? So if you're testing an individual service, there might not be much to monitor behind it.
Right.
But then if you're testing at a higher level where you have a service that's backed by services, or you're testing at an application level, now that's when you need monitoring of all the different whether layers, right, inside the code or at the different services. But the good thing about testing an individual service is you can make sure that component's good on its own, and then you test at a higher level to validate the whole system, right? So I think backend monitoring is very important. The other thing you mentioned, developer tools. One thing that we also found, if you're doing testing on web apps, right, web UIs, kind of talking about real users versus virtual users. Like the virtual ones, you're just throwing the network traffic, but the real users you might want to run in a browser. You might want to run simulated, something that's like a browser, but you don't just need to measure the timing for individual HTTP requests, right? It's like the page load times, right? How long does it take till it's complete, right? Or you can interact with it, or so that's another aspect of measuring performance that's not just at the network layer.
Web performance and all of those type of things at the front end also.
Right, that's the user's experience, right?
Yeah.
So that's very important.
How about you, Aaron?
So I'll just build on what you were saying, and I think you mentioned Lighthouse, and I'm seeing a trend. You've seen we talked a bit about open source, and you mentioned Lighthouse. So Lighthouse with in part of the dev tools and CDP, we see Playwright, we see Selenium integrated with that, and Cypress, and they are using actually Lighthouse audits within these frameworks to do this front end user behavior measurements. And it's for free, right? So that's a good trend that I'm seeing, not just functional, but also baking performance testing through Lighthouse and these kind of open source free tools within these frameworks. Another thing that I'm starting to see, again, it's very early stages, but it's a good sign for performance engineering, is that the observability part of the house, the observability tools, and I'll give you just one tool that I just recently started looking at. It's called Lightrun. Lightrun is a debugging observability tool in production, but it gets you snapshots from production. It gets you the ability to put metrics and KPIs for performance within the developers' IDEs, IntelliJ, Eclipse, and so on. And you can actually learn from real data, real production. I'm paying you back for the shift, right? Okay.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Okay, we're done here. And with Lightrun, actually, which you have also a community edition to use, you actually do this performance measurements and actually convince developers that performance testing is quite important as well. So check out Lightroom.
I'm actually taking notes. I wasn't aware of that, and sounds super interesting, and especially tagging and controlling, like from the developer who is inserting changes or defects or problems. it's like a proposition I had years ago, like a dream come true. Amigo Jonathan?
Yeah, so Lighthouse, Lightrun, sorry, recently took some funding. Great capability, and I think you've hit it on the shift left mantra. There is that
we don't speak about shift left.
We don't talk about shift left.
Test early.
Test early. Shift happens, as Filoni would say, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is that being able to actually debug in production and see all the way through to the code that's running and where it's spending its time and its cycles. Mm-hmm. I think is a dream that we've always wanted, right? I'm not going to use my full endorsement at the second, but Taurus, is open source. It is amazing. You just go to gettaurus.org. And if you've got Selenium scripts, it'll convert Selenium scripts. You've got SoapUI scripts, it'll convert those, and it'll create it and execute. In essence, it's just JMeter on steroids, right? Mm-hmm. So I know someone mentioned JMeter and Homebrew there. Now, JMeter has been a bit of a challenge, right? So especially going between the different versions, and then the plugins seem to kind of go out and in date. So whether or not using the Kafka plugin, for instance, it can, you find that sometimes that you have to go through different versions. It's quite difficult. Same thing if you've got things like Dynatrace, Splunk, New Relic, you're trying to bring in the APM information so that you can graph that information so you can do the cause and effect kind of modeling. Again, it's very basic. It gets you started, but really what you want to do is get into some kind of time series data, right? Of course, people are moving into Influx as a kind of a standard, which is great. I kind of come from, the tick stack. So if you go on the tick stack, you can download all the tools that you need to pretty much dashboard the whole thing out. And then you've got that time series data. Once you've got what I refer to as multi-dimensional transactional data, then you've got the keys to the kingdom, right? You can pretty much do everything you possibly want. You can do better reporting and analytics. I'm surprised all the way through this, no one's mentioned the Astro load test / load runner. Then maybe because Micro Focus didn't turn up to this event, maybe that's what's happened, or the open text. But I'm not going to.
A lot of stuff happening there. Yeah.
I'm not going to mention that because things like SiteScope. Again, we're trying to introduce this ability to give you full traceability and observability, which is incredibly important for effective performance engineering. I would have to obviously point the book for Todd DiCaprio and Sean Evans, who wrote the book on effective performance engineering, which is a free book you can download from effectiveperformanceengineering.com. wherever that is. And that has literally the best thing about that ebook is at the back, it has all the questions you need to ask to every single department, whether it's the people configuring the load balancing, the infrastructure, all the questions. Of course, if I didn't also mention Alchemist for real-time tuning and using artificial intelligence to improve the optimization of throughput, that's the game-changing technology. And then my actual one that I'm going to give you is our product, which is Real Customer Insight, which, Scott literally, it kind of blew his mind when he looked at it, because we can observe everything what's happening in the real world and then generate all the tests and the transactional stuff, just like Performance Application Lifecycle used to give us in the old load runner days, which it was on disk 2 if you ever used disk 2, but they unfortunately end-of-lifed it in 2022, which is a shame because it was an awesome bit of tool. It would look at your log analytics like JBoss or whatever it was and generate a volumetric view as a starter of 10. We're starting to do the same thing with Real Customer Insight and Monitoring Insights to generate all your tests that you need automatically and your profiles to get you started. That's my 800 tools.
The list that's a little bit long, but I am happy because you touched several points that are super important for performance testing engineering modern practices. Mm-hmm. Some of the tools that made me think like, yeah, you're right. Some of those we haven't heard much of them in a while. Of course, they're still around, but the emphasis and the way in which you utilize the information, the performance metrics, you hit something that I was gonna ask as well. What do you prefer or do you use lately the most to store your results and analyze and generate those almighty reports that we used to spend hours and hours creating? Francisco, what do you do with your results?
Well, again, I feel like I'm harping on the same product, but Neoload has a feature where you can, get the results that you want. It can be done either at the transaction level or even more into it, where you can get, more depth into what it is that you want to get. But then one of the things that we've done, at least in our company, is that on top of the reports that we get from the tool, we also have set up jobs with Jenkins where it does its own reporting as well, and we can link the results that we get from Neoload and then output them into the Jenkins CI/CD situation where they can see the results as it's run. So those are two ways where the teams can get some level of reporting from our systems.
Silly question. How was the experience of getting the results from Neoload into Jenkins?
Initially, it was challenging just because we were not familiar with the way, how things were set up. But once it got going, once we were able to get one of the jobs to run, it was very efficient in the sense of like teams going in, starting a run, and then within 10, 15 minutes, they can see the results and they see what they want to see, where it's either the averages or they want to see the errors, whatever it is that they want to trace. It was easy for the teams to get access to that type of information.
Whoever had access to Jenkins could also see it there.
That's
I'm
right.
guessing. Yeah. How about you, Nathan?
Yeah, so so I mentioned we use our Parasoft load test tool, and obviously that'll generate the same kind of reports that a Neoload would. But what I want to focus on is we also have a tool we call Load Test Continuum, which is a tool that allows us to graph those historical results over time. So, so that could be things like the metrics, like how many hits per second am I getting with the number of users I'm running, right? And I can see that graph. So that for me that's primarily what we're looking at, is because we can see all of our metrics. Do they pass or do they fail? And then we can see the historical trends for each one of them. And I think that allows us, we actually use it in two different ways. We use it when we're testing some of our, our APIs or our web applications, but we also use it, using it in a unique way where we're testing the functionality of some of our other, I didn't mention, but besides our functional testing tools, we also have more development level stack analysis, unit test generation tools. And we're actually measuring how long it takes to, our unit test generation tool. And that's not like under load, as you were saying, it's just like the performance of that functionality. And we can also measure that over time with metrics, performance metrics for that. So that tool is the one, it's our own tool, our customers use it, but we also find that incredibly valuable internally, so.
Personal question, getting that information on those metrics from the tool if I need them elsewhere, are there capacities to manipulate or play with them after?
Yeah, you can push the data in, you can pull the data out as you need to.
Totally transparent, I love it. Amigo Ren?
So no surprise, we have in BlazeMeter, like you guys mentioned, similar reports with dashboards, and you can analyze everything. What I think we learned based on also some customers that requested it is to bake into these dashboards also. We talked earlier about a bit about scale, right? So using test data within performance testing. So think about generating synthetic data at massive scales, your username, your password, your locations, everything that you can input into a website or any application, basically, generating tons of synthetic data that the performance testing is capturing and using, exercising, then reflecting it in the dashboards. That's something that we recently added based on requests from customers. And I think we get, as of now, it's quite new. We get some nice feedback that it's useful. It gets them, it actually expedites their quality visibility into this massive scale.
No follow-up questions. That was good.
I know you.
No, because I have seen it. Amigo Jonathan?
So to get Iram back in the sense that that was my old development team from Grid Tools that he's now acquired, and secondly, to give him TDM engine, which I know Parasoft have an epic TDM synthetic generator as well.
Yeah.
I'm now going to give you a backdoor way of getting everything out of BlazeMeter for free. And then what Iran's going to do is going to run next door and actually tell the developers we need to fix this, because otherwise everyone's going to use it. So for the JMeter guys in the audience, the loophole within JMeter and Taurus is if you create a JMeter scripts, run it with Taurus, you can then just add /report at the end, and it will load BlazeMeter's reporting engine up and create you all these amazing visual results. But you don't need to pay any licensing because you're not running it through BlazeMeter, you're running it through Taurus, which is open source. Nice little loophole there. Thank you very much. I've been using it for years. But secondly, that recording is really fantastic because it's built on, Alon built it, but it's a really beautiful graphing engine which they've got.
Yep.
But I'm going to take that back to a second. So we talked about the fact Captain gives you this great ability to get that information over time. And one of the things that I've always spotted, and which is like I guess it's my big pet hate of performance for a second, is taking something like a 99 percentile or a 95 percentile or taking an average. It hides the complexity, right? Really what you want to do is you want to pull that out to something like Tableau or Power BI or any other data visualization platform of your choice, and visualize all of the data, not just the average times and the 95 percentiles, and then look for the outliners. Now, I was talking to Andreas at Dynatrace the other day about the fact that one of my favorite features of Neoload, as we're plugging Neoload for a second, and I didn't do it before. What you can do is you can actually inject a tag into the headers that allows it to correlate it with the APM. So if I've got test 1, 2, 3, 4 over here, and I want to see exactly what happened from a pure path perspective, if that was my outliner, which was right up here, and it was, I'd taken some synthetic data test TDM capability, and it was actually because this person was coming in from Japan and it required a better workload at the back end because it's a different process, because it's not an American customer or something, you could actually trace that down to the injections that are happening and, really get down to the nitty gritty of the data. And I think that's really important to correlate between execution and what actually happened in the real world. And you've got, your favorite APM, all of them support this kind of capability. So I think that's really where we're kind of going now is how do we get to this point where we can understand things? And the bit which I'm going to add into it, because it was also something Andreas said to me yesterday, was we need to get to this point where we start talking about open data, open testing, open test data, whatever you want to call it. It's about exchanging information. So if you're relying on a third party which you integrate with your system, let's call it SAP or Salesforce or Workday, whatever it may be, you don't get their APM data because they don't share you that information, but you're dependent on one of their capabilities. All you know is that you're sending them a request and you get a response within 4 seconds, whatever, but you don't know when you go live whether or not that Amex gateway is going to support 10,000 requests. So what we really need to do is we need to allow people to share their APM telemetry into our system so we can see other people's systems and debug further down the third-party ecosystem. So Andreas and everyone else are talking about open telemetry. We need the equivalent for open testing and open test data so that we can share and exchange information between subsystems.
I believe that you also hit the nail in very key points, what you were telling, like individual data points, turning them into traces with those tags. It's really important. And since some solutions, organizations, or platforms started to do that, it became really easy to find what was the path, where the user is starting to get stuck. I really like to start to think in those ways, not only data points, but logs, traces, metrics, everything that we can get into the system to make it easier. Very good one. Now, we are running out of time, starting the ramp down, no pun intended. And I want to give an opportunity for some Q&A. If anyone in the audience want to take advantage of having all these wizards in performance all together, and you have a blazing question that you cannot wait to ask and get answered, anyone would like to ask something that has been itching you, like solving your performance? Bring it on.
So in a world of unorganized engineering and
Everywhere.
and limited resources, where the company might not have the luxury of getting a performance engineer, what would you recommend as a starting point for an engineering team to kind of begin their performance journey?
Anyone would like to tackle that one?
Don't point at me. I genuinely think this is an incredibly hard question, right? Because you just identified either one side or the other, right? If we're talking about SRE for a second, you were going to hire an SRE team. They would be already know all this kind of stuff. And the same as if you're looking at a performance engineer, but if they're new and you're trying to get started, there's great training material out there at the moment. You can go to BlazeMeter's got a free university where you can learn the basics and go through it. And like you said, use Taurus, use the backdoor into BlazeMeter and get all the functionality. Parasoft having also a great free resource for training on APIs and everything else. So do Neotis. So all of those have got them. And of course, following your blog on K6.
K6, we also are just coming up with a K6 Learn. You want to call it like a body of knowledge or knowledge base, where we are trying to put as much information, slides, or everything that you need. There are multiple sources to start. And personally, if I can complement Jonathan's answer, I would say I like to know what is the performance of my system without having to do much with it. So I tend towards before observability, instrumentation, OpenTelemetry, you very well mentioned. That's becoming a standard that I have the feeling that it will be usable for several years to come if you start implementing it. I like a lot what you get out of it right away after you start implementing it. It gets some work to at times, not always, but when you start to see what you can reap out of it, it's incredible. It's huge.
Yeah, and just to final on there, go and download the Perf Guild. So if you go to Performance Guild, so it's the test talks, which is Joe Colantonio, who's been wandering around. The podcast series is phenomenal. You know, the last one was a lady who literally only just started, so it might be really relevant. She'd only started performance a month ago. She'd started a boot camp. She liked testing, and then I found a way to do Playwright and do load testing with Playwright. You know, Dawn has been on there talking about performance. It's a great listen. Go through there, and I know we've got the Damned podcast as well.
Use of the Damned.
Yeah,
Perf Bites.
Perf Bites is a fantastic podcast. So just download some episodes, throw it on in the car, throw it on on the plane journey home, and it'll give you a really good insight into how to start.
Another one that I'm going to throw there in terms of podcast, the amigos at Dynatrace have Pure Performance as well. Highly recommended. Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson bringing lots of interesting people, knowledge, and I think some of us have participated with them here and there. Nathan, you had some recommendations.
Yeah. One thing to look for too is you can look for tools. I mean, I'll tout ours, but you can look for tools that you can take a functional test and reuse that in a performance test, because that, if you're already creating functional like API tests and you know how to use that tool, if you could repurpose that for load testing, sometimes you can't just use it one for one. You have to modify it or tweak it, but that can save you a lot of time. And then at that point, then you focus on what are my highest value scenarios that I care about. And you start small. I think we talked about that earlier, right? So, okay, maybe you just measure for one user and then you just measure for 10 and you slowly build up over time. Like you can't just go for the big, let's do 1,000 users all at once, right? There's a lot, building up your infrastructure, building up your knowledge, all that, you just step by step, one step at a time.
Sadly, many of us probably have been in those situations. Like first day, let's blast the system. What? All right. Any other question? Anyone? Feel free. Take the advantage. No? Okay. For the audience, I'm going to take this opportunity because this is a question that I get often. Be as brief as possible. We are running out of time. What would you recommend to people just starting in performance testing to do, Francisco?
Just be curious. If you have that curiosity to, this probably might be my QA thinking, but like if you like to break things, if you're curious to see how things work, how I guess how software is made. I do think that performance engineering is a good way to go, just because you get to find out, like, how systems are put together, the infrastructure, the workflows of how things are put together. I was kind of in that situation. I'm self-taught, and so like for me, it's just a curiosity for wanting to learn, wanting to see how systems are, the different ways of things are put together. It's just curiosity for me, like just to want to learn.
Nathan, quick recommendation.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I just said. I think it's so important to build up slowly because it's not just can your site handle it, but it's also all your load generators and all the infrastructure you need to handle the stuff. And so starting very small and just increasing the complexity one small step at a time and making sure everything runs the way you want. I think we found that that's incredibly important.
Awesome. Amigo Dan?
I will just say something different, just not to repeat. I definitely support the education material, so it will help you start small and also prove, the value. I also look at the human factor here. Okay, find more champions surrounding you. You said that you're just starting. Find peers that also cares about user experience and performance, and build this internal awareness of why performance is so important before things blow out. Do some POCs to the other team, to the greater team. So, education kind of dives deeper within the org, and then it's just going to help this starting small and growing be more successful.
Thanks, amigo. Jonathan, we have 30 seconds before we
So
go on to the next
30
one.
seconds is plenty of time. Maybe go from doing performance to shifting to look at site reliability engineering as well as a discipline. Look at the books, look at the new material. Maybe even go and look at chaos engineering, things like Gremlin, which Carlton did a great job. He did chaos engineering at AWS. Look at the hard stuff and then work your way backwards.
Thank you very much. All right, and probably now it's time for the moment that everyone that has been watching us has been waiting for. We are about to get into the dynamic to win a PS5.
Ooh.
So stay tuned, get ready, because here comes the question. While we were all discussing, arguing, and fighting, and all this fun that we just had, there was a little moment when here, yours truly, started singing. What song did I started singing earlier today? So go to the QR code that is being shown up there in front of our amigo Jonathan, scan it, get to the Google form, and please answer, what is the title of the song that this guy here, me, started singing when we were arguing? To give you a little hint, it started from a phrase that Iran said. Do you remember? Were you paying attention? Please submit your answers. You will have, no, this one is you will have only 30 minutes because we will start the raffle or give it away in the next stream, the closing stream for the event. So everybody, thank you very much for hanging on with us during this panel. For everyone here present to bring your questions and your smiles and nods. I could tell that some of you were feeling the same things as we were sharing. And thank you all, amigos. It was such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for
everybody,
being here.
it's time to call it a day, and we'll see you